All right, my name is Caleb Barlow. I come to you from IBM Security, and we're going to talk a little bit about the paradigm shift that we see today in cybercrime. But before I get into that, a couple things. First off, if you'd like to connect with me or hear a little bit more about what IBM Security is doing, you're welcome to connect with me on Twitter or LinkedIn. In addition, if you'd like to see more in-depth views of presentations like this, you can see them on my YouTube channel that's up here. So first and foremost, let's talk about this paradigm shift that we're starting to see in cybercrime. This is now one of the world's largest illegal economies. 445 billion in annual illegal profits. More than 1 billion pieces of information, personal information, hopefully not yours. But let's also remember that 80% of what we're dealing with is not bored teenagers or even nation-state actors. It's simple, organized crime. But this is a paradigm shift in fraud, and it's coming from the fact that you don't need to be technically sophisticated to launch a cyber attack anymore. You know, if we wind back 8-10 years ago, you needed to be an expert in technologies like Python, HTML, JavaScript, in order to launch an attack. Well, what do you need today? You know, you don't necessarily need networking or even familiarity with routers and switches. In fact, you don't really even need knowledge of computer security at all. What you need is to be an entrepreneur and have a little bit of money, and you can invest because, like everything else, cyber attacks have gone to the cloud with software as a service. So let's take a look at that in a little more detail. But first and foremost, let's get a few basic definitions out of the way. So the thing I'd like to think about first is the clear net. This is where you and I all operate today. Think of this as websites that are accessible through a Google browser, okay? Now the IBM X-Force Threat Intelligence Team tracks 25 billion websites, URLs, and images on the clear net every day looking for fraudulent activity. Not exactly the easiest place for the bad guys to hang out. But then if we move to the deep web, these are sites that are protected behind a firewall, protected behind a user ID and a password. In fact, over 85% of the information on the internet exists somewhere deeper than the clear web. Now, better place for the bad guys to hang out? Sure. Information's protected behind a login. But let's face it, if you can figure out what's going on there, law enforcement can track down the IP address, which leads them to the server, which leads them to the hosting environment, which eventually leads them to the bad guy. So we need something better for a bad guy. What do we need? Well, we move into the dark net, an area of the internet where you can operate anonymously, where you can buy, sell, and trade goods and services. In fact, you can even move money without anyone knowing who you are. So let's take a look at this in a little more detail. And you know, what I'm about to show you are images of actual websites, actual locations. And the only thing I'd ask is, please don't try this at home. So let's see just how easy it is to enter the dark web and build an attack. Gone are the days of technical hacking. Enter the days of the lazy man's hack, where, well, all you need to do is a search on Google and download specialized software that will get you access to the criminal underground that is the dark web, where you can collaborate, buy, sell, and rent fraud, data, drugs, anything that might be illegal. When it comes to fraud, one of the first things the dark web allows you to do is buy and sell people's sensitive personal information, their identities. In fact, you can even build a false identity, hopefully not mine, that allows you to commit fraud. Marketplaces like this offer you the chance to search and browse at different dates of birth, social security numbers that have all been parts of previous worldwide hacks. Medical records, it turns out, are the highest profile target for hackers right now. They yield the highest margin on the dark web marketplaces, and for good reason. They have the most data on you. And You know, if you're in a hurry, you can buy false passports and other critical information to get out of the country, perform a scam, and even send bills to unknown addresses. But if passports aren't enough, what about creating a driver's license, credit card? There's no limit to what can be transacted. There's a vast amount of data available on the dark web, and it's all up for grabs. And the scariest part is it could be yours. Now, beyond the data, consider advanced attacks that exist today. Rats, exploit kits, malware, phishing. It's a $455 billion industry. Well, where do these come from? Well, we're not far from the source. Like a general contractor in charge of a building, you outsource them to various subcontractors. The general contractor doesn't do the electrical and the plumbing themselves. You find the right people with the right tools. Source a hacker's resume and reviews to see if they've got the skills that you desire. You can trust in an untrusted environment with these reviews. Build teams and collaborate to make sure you have the right resources to pull off that mega breach. And find the hack that's right for you. You can even buy or rent these attacks. Ransomware, for example. Purchase this as a service and take part in the ops side. Or if you want to build the hack yourself, you can just buy and download the tool. It's not just fraud either. The dark web is a marketplace for anything illegal. And it's all anonymous. The buyer, the seller, and the transactions are all completely protected. Now, how many people are doing this? Well, millions. And we've got to remember that the dark web actually has some legitimate purposes as well. Political dissidents, reporters collaborating with sources, and the thousands of people that sit in countries around the world where the internet is censored. But we've got to stop admiring the problem. We've got to come up with a solution. And I would propose to you that part of the way we do that is we have to start to become strategically proactive in what we do. The problem is actually very similar to a pandemic, and we need a similar response across governments, private industry, and cybersecurity companies. So how are we going to do that? Well, you heard others today talking about the idea of an immune system response. Well, how are we actually going to build that immune system? What needs to be in that immune system? We need things like data protection, application protection, network security, vulnerability assessments. The list goes on and on and on. How are we going to assemble the right tools and solutions to do that? Well, what we need is a framework. So let's first organize this around a few key deliverables. Now, what you see here is the IBM security framework. Not very different than what you might see from NIST or from COBIT. But it allows us to look at each of these elements of security and ensure we have both breadth and depth. You know, this isn't just about building the castle wall. We need the moat, we need the archers on the wall, we need the sentries out in the village. And all of this has to come together and bring back intelligence and information from every one of these circles around the board. All of this flows up into a security intelligence layer. For us, this happens to be QRadar. This gives us the analytics and the ability to look at what's going on across the spectrum of security and roll all of this up. Now, as a security vendor, IBM provides solutions in all of these different spaces. But let me take this opportunity to tell you a little bit about a startup. Now, this happens to be Startup Nation. But what if I told you about a startup that was just over 4 years old, had assembled 7,500 security professionals, 1,000 of which were added in the last year alone, had just completed its 20th startup acquisition in the security space, was now producing $2 billion in annual revenue. This happens to be not only the fastest, but also the largest enterprise security company in the industry. This is IBM Security, and we've been at this, again, for just over 4.5 years. So, interestingly enough, we're here in Israel. Well, Israel's a very strategic location for us. You see, we IBM have acquired 14 companies in Israel, 3 of which you see represented on this chart as key parts of our security model. For IBM Security, after the US, Israel is the second largest place on the planet, with 500 security experts. Guardium, AppScan, and Trusteer, along with the Beersheba Lab at the Cyber Center of Excellence, are all key parts to our strategy. Israel is our worldwide center of research for banking fraud. Here in Tel Aviv, at Trusteer, we're servicing more than 100 of the largest banks in the world, keeping millions of customers' money safe. And we are proud and thankful that our leading SIM, QRadar, was selected by the National Cyber Bureau to serve the government cert and to be a national SOC for the government. Ladies and gentlemen, Israel is a place of innovation for IBM, and it's the face of IBM security. And we are very, very proud of that. So now let me talk a little bit about some of the new innovations that we're working on. Now, one of the first things we have to recognize is that over the course of time, what we think of as the traditional perimeter has become very lossy. More and more data is moved to the cloud and to mobile. And how are we going to protect that data? Well, one of the tools we use to do that is something called Cloud Security Enforcer. This is all about not telling people they can't use the cloud, because let's face it, end users are going to do it anyway. This is about providing them with a better yes, guiding them to solutions that are sanctioned by your enterprise to allow them to still use the cloud, but do it with their enterprise credentials, so that when they use solutions like Box or Salesforce.com, and that employee leaves the company, or their device or their account is compromised, you still have control over the data, and the genie hasn't left the bottle. Now, the second thing I want to talk about is something called X-Force Exchange. Now, when the Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security was up a few minutes ago, he talked about the importance and the kind of national priority of sharing information for the public good. At IBM, we're taking this one step further. We firmly believe in the importance of democratizing threat intelligence data. We do not charge for our threat intelligence data, and we have published everything we know on a social network for threat researchers called the X-Force Exchange. And we are very committed to doing this. You see, we have to change the economics for the bad guys. And the single best way to do this is to make their attacks only viable for minutes or hours. Because if one of us, any one of us, detects the attack and shares it with everyone else in the room, then we all become inoculated to that new virus or malware. And for the bad guys, this is a big problem. Because remember, we're not up against bored teenagers. We're up against highly organized gangs of 20 or 30 people that have invested tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars in developing that new attack. And if it's only viable for minutes, then what was the point of building it in the first place? And this is exactly what we're trying to do with X-Force Exchange. You're all welcome to join it, and it's free of charge. But more importantly, all of IBM's X-Force threat research is published there on a near real-time basis. But it's got to be about more than just providing the threat sharing. We need to open up the engine behind it. So I talked about IBM's QRadar, our SIM. Well, this happens to be Startup Nation. If you're a security startup, you can actually integrate your solution in with QRadar and provide it not just an API, but actually be on the glass in QRadar. And this is exactly what our partners like Carbon Black and Exabeam are doing, allowing us to extend that ecosystem beyond just the innovation that we produce at IBM ourselves. Now, part of what we've got to recognize is that most of the information we deal with as security professionals is very much structured data. It's the tip of the iceberg. It's events and logs and network activity. But 85% of the security information in the world is designed to be consumable by human beings. Research documents, publications, transcripts of conferences like this. Today, on average, an organization sees over 200,000 pieces of security event data per day, spends $1.3 million a year chasing down false positives, wasting nearly 21,000 hours in the process. Couple this with the 10,000 security research papers published every year and the 60,000 plus security blogs each month, and you quickly realize the problem. So our game changer is to apply cognitive solutions to this problem. Yes, we're talking about IBM Watson, the same tooling that we've focused on solving cancer and addressing the Jeopardy Grand Challenge. Our goal is to start to use cognition to break down this barrier, to be able to respond to threats with greater confidence, at scale, and at speed. Now, to give you an idea of how this works and how we start to get underneath that unstructured data, The way in which we do this, let me give you an analogy. So let's think about an ambulance responding to the scene of a head injury, right? Well, in a case of a head injury, interestingly enough, a diabetic emergency, a head injury, and someone that's just intoxicated all show the same signs and symptoms. Well, what does that paramedic responding do? They look at the structured data like their pulse, respirations, oxygen level, blood pressure, but they also look at unstructured data like, oh, the victim was in a car accident, they hit the windshield, they cracked the windshield. They also are thinking back to the conference proceedings from 2 weeks earlier where they learned about head injuries. All of this information is coming together. And when they go to the hospital, they have an interesting cadence with the physician. Hey, I responded to a victim of a 25-year-old victim of a motor vehicle accident. I believe this to be a head injury. They hit the windshield was cracked, their speech is slurred, their pupils are not equal or reactive to light. Well, what just happened in that exchange? They provided evidence and they backed that evidence up. This is exactly what we're doing with Watson. And today we're training Watson. It has to learn just like a human being. We have to ingest up to 10,000 documents a month and help Watson manually tag them. And learning just like a human learns. We have to tell it just like a human would learn, what's an adjective, what's a verb, what's a noun. Watson has to learn what's an attack, what's a victim, what is malware. An interesting story about 2 weeks ago, Watson thought ransomware was a city. I asked our researchers, I'm like, why does it think it's a city? Well, if you think about it, ransomware is not a term that's in a dictionary. It had to learn. We had to go back and say, no, Watson, ransomware is not a city. Ransomware is a form of an attack. And our best guess on why it made that conclusion is actually there are cities named Ransom. So we're training Watson to take on this next challenge and be able to augment our security researchers. Because by 2020, there'll be somewhere around 1 million open cybersecurity jobs, and we need all the help we can get. But I'm very pleased also to announce today that some of this work is happening right here, as IBM has partnered with leading researchers at Ben-Gurion University to train Watson. Specifically, we work with BGU on advanced mechanisms for knowledge representation and high-performance engines for answering questions. This work is being coordinated by our Cybersecurity Center of Excellence on the campus of BGU, which drives many other joint projects with the university as well. So that's our story. And what I want to leave you with is that this is a problem we can all solve together. But it means we have to think about new technologies in new ways. We have to work together to bring innovation to the forefront. And most importantly, we've got to democratize the data that we deal with every day. Thank you.